I collected quite a long time ago now, but the research hasn't changed, so this data still holds true. To try to give you an idea of how important it can be to be engaged on the playground with the children, to be modeling physical activity and motor skills. And then once we've had a quick look at that, I said yesterday, if you've seen that email, I said that I would go over the guidelines for the e-portfolio that I forgot to open last week. So we'll have a look at those as well. And then hopefully that will make the first assignment make a bit more sense for you. So I do apologise about that. No wonder I was getting all those emails going, Dr. Wall, I don't know what to do. So let's have a look. First off, this data. Okay, so as I said, this data was quite a while ago, but it does still hold true. And these pictures give you an idea of some of the motor skill toys that I use on the playground that you'll see later in the observational videos. So what we were looking at here was what was the effect of the PE session, and the climate that I run on the playground is called Mastery Motivational Climate, and we'll talk more about that over the next week or so. And so what we wanted to see was the days that I and my students, the lab class, were on the playground versus the days when we weren't there and the children either weren't on the playground or were on the playground with their teachers. Okay? And so we were looking at heart rate and physical activity levels between those two situations. So this is important because we've got a situation where, you know, children are, even these very young children are exhibiting overweight, and some of them even obesity, even by the age of like 4, which is quite dreadful. And hopefully you would have an understanding now after what we did for the first couple of weeks that, you know, being that heavy would make it difficult to achieve competency at the time we need to in those fundamental motor skills. So the purpose was to look at heart rate and physical activity in preschoolers within a rural New Mexico setting. And we thought that probably what we would see would be higher heart rates and activity levels on the days that we were there versus when the teachers are out on the playground with the children. So I thought this poster had a picture of the ActiHeart monitor, but it doesn't. That's annoying, I need to add one. So we used ActiHeart monitors. They're little round discs, real small, and you attach them to the individual's chest. And then with the preschoolers, what we did was we got that wrapping tape, like athletic training wrapping tape that doesn't stick to the skin, it just kind of grips to itself. We got that in a whole load of different colors, so the children could pick the color they wanted, and we would wrap that around their chest to stop them from fidgeting with the heart rate monitor during the day. Okay? And then at the end of the day, we would take the heart rate monitor off, bring it back to the office, download the data, and have a look at what we saw. All right. So I only have 2 of those monitors. They're pretty expensive. And so each day we would go and collect data on 2 children, and then we would do those same 2 children on a day when we weren't on the playground with them. And so they would wear the monitor from whatever time they arrived at the daycare, so somewhere between 7:30 and 8 usually. And then we would take them off when they woke up from nap time, somewhere around 2:45, 3 o'clock. And then, as I said, we would download it and clean the monitors off for the next day for different children. Okay? So, happily, what we found was what we were hoping to find, except in spades. Right? It was, the data was way, way better than we could have asked for, to be honest. So if you look over on the right at that table, you can see that the average heart rate for the children, so these are 3 to 5-year-olds, right? Average heart rate on the days that the lab class was on the playground was about 127 beats per minute. And the average on the days that we weren't there was about 108 beats per minute. So quite a lot lower than it was on the days that we were there. And that difference, 108 to 127, is actually a significant difference. So we were making a big difference in heart rate. Now, one of the problems with only measuring heart rate is that, yes, it goes up when we exercise, but it also goes up if we're angry, okay? Which 3 to 5-year-olds, you know, will have little spats amongst themselves or with the teacher, and then it's all forgotten and over. But in that period of time, their heart rate would go up quite a lot. So we also had to look at activity data and tie the 2 together so that we could genuinely say this higher heart rate wasn't because the kids were throwing a wobbly that day on the playground. Okay? So the ActiHeart monitor collects heart rate data but also accelerometer data. So we were able to look at activity counts. And that was the biggest shock, really, was that on average their activity count when we were on the playground during lab was 470, and their average activity count when we weren't there and they were out with the teachers was 158. So the activity count really highlights how sedentary the children are typically when they are out on the playground with their teachers. All right. Now, as I said, this was quite a long time ago. In my personal opinion, from what I've seen, the current crop of teachers are doing a much better job at trying to get the children active on the playground, so that's great. This must have been at least 10 years ago, this data, and the teachers we had were older. They were both overweight, if not bigger than overweight, and their version of being on the playground was to sit down on a chair. Okay, so that tells you something about the picture of this 158. Because the adults were not modeling physical activity, physical play, motor skill, competency, the children would sit on the swings, or they'd climb into the rock and just sit down, or they would sit in the sand pit. They didn't run around and play. Okay? So we saw that Girls were more sedentary than the boys when we looked at the individual data. And a piece of data we weren't really looking for, but that turned up when we were examining the data, was what was happening to their heart rate for the following 2.5 hours after the play sessions. So the play sessions were at that point quite early in the morning. We would be on the playground at 8 o'clock for the first group, and then the second group would come out about 8:25. And I'm not sure how much you guys know yet about metabolic rate and the increase in metabolic rate after some vigorous physical activity, but that increase in metabolic rate for a period of time after activity helps you to use up additional calories that you wouldn't ordinarily have used without the activity session. Okay, so again, this wasn't something we were particularly looking for coming into the study, but then when we looked at the data, what we saw was that the following 2.5 hours after the play session, their heart rates on average were about 114 beats per minute, and after their regular outdoor play session with the teachers, it was about 108. So it stayed the same on the playground as it did for the 2.5 hours when they were sitting down in the classroom, right? So that was a significant difference again. So we were raising their metabolic rate. So for the children that were lean, then that might not be as important, but for the children who were overweight or obese, that 2.5 hour difference would impact their calorie use for the day, right? So that would be a good start to try to help them maybe get down to a normal weight, if possible. You'd have to combine that with an adequate nutritional intake that was healthy and provided enough vitamins and protein and what have you for a growing child. But without the activity portion, the diet on its own typically doesn't work, even with this age group. Okay? So I mentioned last week that I was disappointed that the early childhood people don't get to do motor development. And part of that is based on this study, right? Because the teachers either weren't aware of how important being on the playground was, and being physically active, and being and modeling motor skills. You know, as I said, they were both overweight, if not obese. Then, you know, if they're not aware, or they kind of know that they should be doing something a bit more with the children on the playground, but they don't really know how, right? They don't have the skill set because they didn't take the class, okay? So, you know, it was and it still is very frustrating for me that even after all this time and having research that clearly indicates that these teachers need to understand motor development, it still isn't part of their curriculum. So that's a bit frustrating for me. However, we'll keep plodding on. So, questions about this. So the idea, what I wanted to show you today was just how big an impact you can have just by being on the playground and playing, right? Actually doing the play, rather than just sitting down and watching and supervising, right? So if you remember back to Friday's lecture, we had 60 minutes of planned physical activity. I'm not sure whether 60 minutes is realistic or not, because I'm not a childcare teacher, right? But 60 minutes of planned and 60 minutes or more of unplanned. So the sitting down or standing, talking, supervising that the children are healthy, that's their unplanned session, right? But you have to balance that with this planned physical activity session where we are introducing them to a variety of different motor skills and helping them become more competent at those skills, right? Questions? Ideas? Thoughts? Any ideas or thoughts? Little cousins or siblings or your own kids? That's disappointing. Okay, let's have a look at the guidelines. Okay, so this first piece, it says here due the 1st of February, but I extended that to the 8th, so next Monday, since I goofed up and forgot to open these guidelines for you. So this first piece of work is based on the idea of the MSU chart, right? The concept of the MSU chart. So there are some videos of pole vaulting up on Blackboard for you, and you're going to watch those videos and then try to create stages of development for pole vaulting. All right? It's not a skill analysis, so we're not looking at first you run, then you stick the pole in the ground, then you jump, then you fly. No, it's not that, right? Stages of development. What might, right? We don't know. I don't know if any of you have ever done pole vault. Personally, I haven't, right? So I have no idea what the stages might be, all right? So this is a hypothetical set of stages, but you've got to follow the rules of the concept of the MSU chart, right? What does a beginner look like? So stage 1, what might this look like? What does stage 2 look like? What does stage 3 look like? Okay? And remember that in order to distinguish stage 1 from stage 2 from stage 3, something has to change so that I can identify that the individual has moved to the next stage. Right? A minimum of 3 stages. I would not do more than 5. You're going to make it too complicated for yourselves. if you try to do more than 5. All right, so I would make 5 your maximum if you need to go to 5, right? Depends what you think might happen in each stage. All right, and there's a rubric there to help you think about what you've got to consider as you're building this developmental progress through pole vaulting. Yeah. Okay, then the next piece is BMI calculation, and it's due on the Wednesday of next week, but this is a very quick piece of work. All right, so I'm not too worried that the stages is due on the 8th and this is due on the 10th. It won't take you very long to do the BMI calculation, okay? And then we've got a few weeks until you have to analyze TGMD data. And then we'll come back. The playground analysis starts at midterm, so we'll come back and have a look at that. Questions?
No.
Does that explain everything I forgot to explain last week?
So, let me see, I'm trying to pull up my stages there. So what I did is I listed specific characteristics of the pole vault, and then went through every set of the characteristics and tried to match them to stages. Is that kind of similar to what we should do?
Possibly. It sounds reasonable. You can send me a draft if you would like some feedback. I did open up the assignment to a second submission in case some of you had already submitted something without being able to see these guidelines. So people can have another go at it if they want to. Because it really didn't make any sense without this information.
Mm-hmm. So it has to be a Word document, right?
Sorry?
Does it have to be a Word document?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll email that to you then. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, because if you're using a Mac and you submit a dot paper or whatever it is, I can't open that. So, okay. Well, that's what I had for you today. Short and sweet. All right. I have office hours this afternoon if any questions come up by this afternoon. And I will see you tomorrow. Okay? And tomorrow, are we starting a new chapter tomorrow? We might be starting a new chapter tomorrow, I can't remember. So have a look at your syllabus and make sure. All right? Okay, have a great afternoon. It's a lovely day.